It always begins with a fatal underestimation, doesn't it? The arrogant assumption from those closest to you that quiet people are simply weak people. They completely miscalculated, because my family had absolutely no earthly idea that I had been operating in the shadows as the most trusted senior advisor to the state governor for the last 4.5 years. I wasn't just filing administrative paperwork in some windowless, fluorescent-lit basement. I was the executive director single-handedly orchestrating a staggering $4.5 billion metropolitan infrastructure overhaul. And this massive project was scheduled to be broadcast to the entire nation before the clock struck midnight. My name is Harper Vance. Welcome to a story of cold, calculated karma. What you are about to hear is the exact hour-by-hour anatomy of a spectacularly backfired betrayal. This is the unvarnished record of how my own older brother systematically tried to scrub my name from the exclusive guest list of his ultra-luxurious marriage ceremony, utterly convinced that my modest, blue-collar existence would permanently stain his carefully curated, upper-crust aesthetic. He wanted to bury his underachieving sibling out of sight to appease his high society in-laws. He was so blinded by his own ego, so wrapped up in presenting a flawless facade, that he was blissfully unaware I was the one drafting the blueprints for the very cities he thrived in. He thought he was locking me out of the most important room in the state, never realizing I was the one who owned the building. Growing up as the younger Vance sibling meant existing in a perpetual freezing shadow. Thomas, my older brother, was the golden boy. He possessed the kind of effortless brilliance that our folks practically worshipped. He had the stellar Ivy League acceptances, the flawless academic record, and eventually, a serious girlfriend named Emily Sterling, whose aristocratic lineage owned half the commercial real estate in the city. Thomas was handsome, aggressively ambitious, and he made it a daily ritual to remind me that I lacked all those qualities. I was the observer, the analytical mind, which in my household translated to someone who would inevitably need financial rescuing. When I turned 17, the suffocating atmosphere became too much. I sat my parents down and announced my intention to study urban planning rather than pursuing corporate law like they demanded. I remember the clinking sound of my mother setting her crystal wine glass on the mahogany table. She looked at me as if I had spoken in tongues. "Harper, stop the theatrics," she sighed. "How on earth do you intend to afford a decent life drawing maps?" I tried to explain the complexities of city development, mentioning programs I wanted to study up in Madison, but my father immediately cut me off. "Your brother is going to be a brilliant surgeon," he declared loudly. "He is going to save actual human lives. You want to do what exactly? Pour concrete into potholes?" Thomas let out a condescending chuckle from his end of the dining room. "Maybe she can manage a toll booth on the highway," he offered unhelpfully. The entire room erupted in laughter. It was a subtly toxic environment that slowly chipped away at my self-worth. I packed my bags and attended the state university anyway, throwing myself into public administration. When graduation day arrived, the folding chairs reserved for my family remained glaringly empty. They couldn't make the drive. They were too busy toasting Thomas at his elite medical school orientation. My mother called me briefly from a noisy restaurant. "We will take you out for dinner another time," she promised, though we both knew it was a hollow lie. "You have to understand that what your brother is doing is just a bit more monumental right now." I understood. I understood with crystal clarity, and that was the day the final emotional bridge burned to the ground. The definitive breaking point occurred when I was 24. I had spent 2 grueling years grinding as a junior analyst for a local nonprofit, advocating for equitable neighborhood expansion. The compensation was laughable, barely $16,500 annually, but I was acquiring dangerous knowledge. I was learning how municipal power actually operated and how zoning decisions could either elevate or suffocate entire communities. Meanwhile, Thomas had just completed his elite surgical residency and proposed to Emily. My folks threw them a lavish engagement dinner that likely cost triple my entire yearly salary. The venue was packed with hospital executives and old money socialites. I showed up in my most presentable outfit, a thrifted charcoal blazer I had worn to every single job interview. Emily took one condescending glance at me, leaned toward her bridesmaids, and whispered loud enough for the string quartet to hear, "Did the catering staff get lost?" At the dinner table, when a prominent cardiologist politely inquired about my profession, my father forcefully interjected before I could even open my mouth. "Harper volunteers at some little charity organization," he chuckled dismissively. We are praying she transitions into a legitimate career soon. I stopped attending their grand gatherings after that night. Thomas labeled my absence as dramatic. I considered it strict self-preservation. The only person who truly saw me was my late grandmother. Before she passed away, she left me her modest life savings, exactly $75,000, with a handwritten note that simply read, "Build an empire they cannot ignore." And I did. What my blood relatives remained entirely blind to was that my meager analyst role had catalyzed into something unprecedented. At 25, my research on transit equity caught the eye of the state's highest executive. She was a ruthless pragmatist who valued visionary infrastructure over cheap political victories, and she quietly brought me onto her transition team. I proved to be exceptionally skilled at the bureaucratic chess game. Within 14 months, I vaulted to senior advisor. By 28, I was the executive director of urban policy, commanding a brilliant team of 65 specialists and controlling a staggering $4.5 billion budget to completely redesign the state's commercial arteries. I went toe-to-toe with federal regulators and union bosses on a daily basis. The governor herself referred to me as her heaviest artillery. I was earning $215,000 a year. I had leveraged my grandmother's financial gift into a breathtaking $850,000 penthouse overlooking the river, completely paid off through aggressive investing. Yet, I guarded this reality fiercely. Why give them the satisfaction of suddenly claiming me as their successful daughter? Why give Thomas the ammunition to somehow minimize my hard-earned achievements? I chose to construct my empire in absolute suffocating silence. Building a life they couldn't touch was the most intoxicating power I had ever tasted. My mother and father assumed I was surviving on instant noodles in a decaying studio apartment. In reality, I had over $500,000 in liquid assets and was regularly dining privately with the state's highest executive. 6 months before the big day, the governor called me into her secure, oak-paneled office. She was a woman of fierce intellect and zero patience for mediocrity. "Harper," she began, sliding a thick dossier across her desk, "I am unveiling the new infrastructure initiative in 4 months. It is the most aggressive statewide overhaul in 4 decades, and I want you leading the charge on stage as my chief director." The announcement was slated for the prestigious Spring Gala. Black tie, heavy press presence, every major power player in the metropolitan area. She wanted to make me the public face of the empire I had built. I thought about my family, about the decades of dismissal, and I accepted the position without hesitation. The universe, however, has a brilliantly twisted sense of humor. The gala was scheduled for Saturday, May 15th. Thomas and Emily's wedding was set for Saturday, May 15th. Same evening, same city. I had received the ostentatious, wax-sealed invitation months prior and dutifully RSVP'd. But exactly 3 weeks before the ceremony, my phone vibrated at 9:47 p.m. I was deep into reviewing a complex zoning policy when Thomas sent the text that would permanently sever our blood ties. "Harper, we need to discuss the wedding," he wrote. "What about it, Thomas?" I replied. "Emily's parents are extremely conscious of their social standing. The photos are going to be featured in elite regional magazines. We are trying to maintain a very specific high-end aesthetic." I stared at the glowing screen. I knew exactly where this toxic conversation was heading. "I don't think it is a good idea for you to attend." The text bubble popped up again. "Your whole nonprofit lifestyle. It just doesn't fit the image we need to project. Mom and Dad agree. We all decided your presence would just embarrass us." I sat in my dimly lit home office, surrounded by blueprints that would dictate the future of millions of citizens. A visceral, burning part of me wanted to unleash my fury, to text him the exact value of my financial portfolio. Instead, I took a slow, measured breath and typed a single response. "Okay, thanks for being honest." I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't argue. I simply closed the message thread, picked up my encrypted work phone, and called the chief of staff to confirm the exact minute of my televised appearance at the gala. The trap was set. The day of Thomas's wedding dawned clear and crisp over the bustling city of Madison. I spent the early afternoon locked in the executive briefing room, running final diagnostics on the multi-billion-dollar proposal. At 3 p.m., I headed back to my penthouse. For the most significant announcement of my professional career, I had commissioned a custom-tailored midnight blue silk gown. It was an uncompromising statement piece that cost a small fortune, but I viewed it as a necessary armor. My styling team arrived shortly after, pulling my hair into a sleek, structural updo, keeping the makeup striking yet fiercely professional. Then, the parallel timelines began to tick down like a meticulously synchronized watch. At 5 p.m., while Thomas and Emily were reciting their hollow vows in a cathedral filled with people who only cared about status, I was slipping on the vintage diamond earrings my grandmother left me. At 5:47 p.m., while the newlyweds were posing for their heavily orchestrated wedding photos, I was stepping into the back of a black armored SUV, being whisked toward the Grand Convention Center. At 6:30 p.m., while my parents were likely clinking champagne flutes and basking in the superficial glory of their perfect son, I was standing in the shadows backstage, being mic'd up by the sound technicians and reviewing my opening remarks one last time. At 7:15 p.m., while Thomas and his new bride made their extravagant grand entrance into their lavish reception ballroom, I was firmly shaking hands with federal senators and elite power brokers during the exclusive VIP cocktail hour. "Big night, Harper," a prominent state senator whispered, clapping my shoulder warmly. "Your strategy on this initiative is going to cement your legacy in this state." I smiled tightly. "It is a collective effort, Senator." "Nonsense," he replied. "Everyone in this room knows you are the absolute architect of this empire." The clock struck 8 p.m. The lights in the massive auditorium dimmed. The symphony of clinking glasses ceased. It was time for the world to know the truth. At precisely 8:15, the massive ballroom fell into a reverent, heavy hush. I was seated at the head table of the gala, positioned directly to the right of the governor. Over 500 of the most influential political, corporate, and media figures in the state were staring intensely at the illuminated podium. "Good evening," the governor's voice boomed through the pristine acoustic sound system, commanding instant authority. "Tonight, we are here to officially launch the largest municipal investment in our state's history. This $4.5 billion initiative will fundamentally redefine how our citizens live, commute, and thrive." A thunderous wave of applause rolled through the cavernous room, shaking the crystal chandeliers. "But a colossal vision of this magnitude does not simply build itself," she continued, her tone shifting from political to deeply personal. "It requires a master architect. It requires an individual who embodies the absolute purest definition of public service. Someone brilliant, entirely unyielding under extreme pressure, and completely unconcerned with personal glory. Someone who brought forward the groundbreaking idea that true economic equity must be built from the ground up." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. 4.5 years ago, the governor projected to the silent crowd. I recruited a young analyst who completely revolutionized my administration's approach to urban development. I promoted her because she earned it through blood, sweat, and undeniable results. And tonight, it is my profound honor to introduce the mind behind this entire operation. The primary spotlight sliced through the darkness, landing perfectly on my chair. Harper has navigated federal bureaucracies, managed an army of specialists, and turned an impossible dream into concrete reality. She is only 31 years old, and she is already carving a permanent mark on our state, the governor said, her voice wavering with genuine, unscripted emotion. "I raised 3 wonderful boys, and I love them fiercely. But I have to tell you all, Harper Vance is the daughter I never had. She is the family I chose. Please, join me on stage." I walked up those velvet-lined steps in what felt like a lucid dream. The standing ovation was deafening. Camera flashes exploded across the room like a relentless lightning storm. The governor embraced me tightly before surrendering the microphone. I delivered my address with absolute precision, speaking passionately about the forgotten neighborhoods we would finally uplift and the staggering 60,000 jobs we would create. Right after my speech, the press pool descended. I pivoted seamlessly into a live television interview, answering hyper-technical questions from seasoned reporters with cold, calculated data and quiet confidence. I owned the room, and I knew, with absolute terrifying certainty, that tomorrow morning's news cycle would be dominated entirely by one name. After the television broadcast concluded, I was immediately swept into a relentless whirlwind of handshakes, flash photography, and impromptu strategy discussions with elite city planners. At exactly 9:45 p.m., I felt the heavy, frantic vibration of my encrypted phone buried deep inside my clutch. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. It felt like a trapped insect, desperately trying to escape. By 10:20 p.m., I finally managed to retreat to a quiet, velvet-draped alcove near the VIP lounge and pulled out the device. 72 missed calls. Nearly 100 unread text messages. The notifications were cascading down my illuminated screen like a digital waterfall. Harper, pick up immediately. Read a text from my father. What the hell is going on? From Thomas. Emily is having a panic attack in the bridal suite. Please explain. Another text from my brother. I nonchalantly opened my social media applications. The official state account had just dropped high-resolution images from the event, tagging me directly. The caption read, "A historic night for Madison and our state. Unveiling the massive $4.5 billion initiative with our brilliant chief director, Harper Vance." The post had already amassed 60,000 likes in under 2 hours. The local digital news outlets were absolutely scrambling, pushing out breaking alerts to everyone's devices. My face, looking powerful and completely unbothered, was plastered across the front page of the Tribune's website. My personal cell number was undoubtedly being passed around the panicked guests at the wedding reception like a live grenade. At 10:50 p.m., my phone lit up again. It was my parents. This time, I swiped to accept the call. "Harper?" My mother's voice was shrill, completely devoid of its usual polished country club composure. "What on earth is happening? Why is your face all over the evening broadcast? Why is the executive calling you her family?" "I'm currently at the spring event, Mom. I'm working." "Working? Thomas swore you were just a volunteer at some local charity. He said you lived in a terrible neighborhood." "I haven't worked at a charity in years," I replied, my voice dangerously steady, designed to freeze her frantic energy. "I am the executive director of this administration's largest initiative. I've been running it for almost 5 years." Dead silence on the other end of the line. It was the exact kind of suffocating silence that happens the microsecond after a bomb detonates. "That's a lie. You had absolutely no idea how to manage money," my father suddenly barked, having snatched the phone. "Why would you maliciously hide this kind of prestige from us?" "Because you lost the right to know," I stated flatly, stripping all emotion from my voice. "You had no idea who I really was, because you never cared to look. You explicitly banned me from Thomas's precious ceremony tonight because my very existence was deemed too embarrassing for Emily's high society friends. Why would I share my monumental success with people who were utterly convinced I was a total failure?" Back at the Grand Country Club in Madison, Thomas's pristine reception was rapidly descending into unmitigated chaos. According to texts I received much later from a sympathetic cousin, the catastrophic shift happened right in the middle of the expensive caviar service. One prominent surgeon's phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. Then a real estate mogul's device chimed loudly. Within minutes, half the ballroom was frantically refreshing their glowing screens instead of paying attention to the newly married couple. "Wait, isn't Harper Vance the sister?" a senior hospital board member asked aloud, showing Thomas a high-definition image of me holding the microphone on stage. Thomas snatched the phone, the color draining entirely from his face. "That is impossible," Emily stammered, peering over his shoulder, her perfectly contoured face contorting in sheer horror. "She is broke. She works for some struggling nonprofit." But the damage was already terminal. The whisper network among the elite is vicious and incredibly fast. The wealthy guests quickly connected the dots. The brilliant mind spearheading a massive statewide initiative was notably absent from her own brother's celebration. When Emily's aristocratic parents cornered my mother and father, asking why I wasn't there to celebrate, they had no viable excuse that wouldn't expose their own toxic behavior. At exactly midnight, the concierge at my hotel lobby called my suite. My parents were downstairs, demanding an audience. I took my time finishing a glass of sparkling water, then descended the grand staircase. They stood near the revolving doors, still wearing their expensive formal wear, but they looked entirely diminished under the harsh chandelier lights. My mother's eyes were frantic. My father's face was an ugly shade of red. "This is an absolute outrage, Harper," my father hissed the moment I approached. "You have completely humiliated us in front of the most important families in the city." "Humiliated you?" I replied, my voice dangerously calm, completely devoid of any daughterly warmth. "I just helped launch an initiative that will generate tens of thousands of jobs. How exactly does my being successful humiliate you?" "You had every idea that tonight was Thomas's moment," my mother cried out, grabbing my wrist. You deliberately orchestrated this media circus to upstage Emily's perfect day. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my skin. I don't control the press cycle, Mom. The administration chose the date. And frankly, Thomas made it very clear that my presence would ruin his precious aesthetic. I simply respected his boundaries. You could have warned us, given us time to prepare our answers, my father demanded, his fists clenched. Like you prepared me for years of emotional neglect? I countered, stepping closer so he could see the absolute lack of forgiveness in my eyes. Like Thomas prepared me before texting that I wasn't good enough to be in his photographs? You taught me exactly what I was worth to you. I just finally accepted your appraisal and adjusted my price. I turned on my heel and walked back toward the elevators. I didn't look back. The media fallout was absolutely relentless. By Sunday morning, the statewide infrastructure overhaul was front-page news across every major publication, and every single story prominently featured my face. The leading metropolitan papers ran expansive profiles detailing my journey, my policy achievements, and the profound televised statement from the governor. Social media exploded with relentless support, praising young women in government and sharing clips from the gala. Meanwhile, the coverage of my brother's perfect day was completely buried. The local journals mentioned it in a tiny 3-sentence brief buried in the back pages. The only photo they chose to publish showed Thomas and Emily looking deeply tense and miserable, likely captured right after the news broke about my actual career. By Monday morning, my inbox was flooded with over 300 media requests. I filtered them down and sat for a prestigious national television interview. When the anchor politely asked if my parents were proud of my work, I paused, allowing the heavy silence to speak volumes. I hope they are, I said softly on live air, but I've learned that building a meaningful legacy matters infinitely more than seeking external validation, even from your own blood. That single soundbite went aggressively viral. The public understood exactly what I was implying without me having to launch a direct attack. The consequences for them were swift and socially brutal. Thomas called my personal number 19 times in 3 days. I let every single one go directly to voicemail. Finally, my parents sent a frantic multi-page letter via private courier, desperately begging for a chance to talk and apologize for their years of toxic behavior. I slid the envelope into a filing cabinet, completely unopened. Emily's elite social circles were absolutely ruthless. The high society guests who had attended the wedding quickly realized that the brilliant woman dominating the news was the exact same sister who had been intentionally uninvited. Thomas and Emily became social pariahs overnight in their own circles. The flawless, aristocratic aesthetic they were so desperate to protect was permanently shattered. People at their country clubs were constantly asking them how they had absolutely no idea what their own family member was doing with her life. Their silence was a confession. 6 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from Thomas. It was penned on expensive, heavy cardstock. "Harper, I am writing to apologize," his messy scrawl read. "You were right about all of it. I was always deeply jealous of your actual passion. I became a surgeon just to follow a script, but you built something real." When Emily's family started obsessing over the wedding photos, I panicked. I thought if you were there, they would instantly see that you were genuinely more successful than I could ever be. I convinced myself I was protecting our public image, but I was just protecting my own fragile ego. You deserved a brother who celebrated you. I read the ink on the page twice. Then, I placed it in the bottom drawer of my heavy oak desk and closed it. Some apologies arrive far too late to rebuild anything structural. They are just words meant to make the guilty party feel better. And I had absolutely no interest in soothing their conscience. 8 months have passed since that explosive night. Today, I sit in my sun-drenched corner office inside the state capitol. The brass plaque on my mahogany door reads, "Harper Vance, Chief Director." Our urban initiative is in full implementation. We have broken ground on 50 massive projects, running significantly ahead of schedule. The governor sat on my leather sofa last week and told me she is officially running for a second term. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Harper, the political landscape is brutal, but you always have a home with us. We genuinely consider you our own." I actually shed a tear. That brilliant, ruthless woman had offered me more genuine parental warmth in 5 years than my biological parents had in 31. In the quiet aftermath, I purchased a sprawling stone retreat on Lake Geneva for $1.2 million, wired entirely in cash from my investment yields. I mailed a single glossy postcard to my parents featuring a sunset over my private dock. Building the peaceful life I always envisioned, I wrote on the back. I deliberately omitted the return address. My brother still attempts to mail me holiday cards featuring perfectly staged, sterile photographs of him and Emily. I do not reply, but I do not incinerate them either. My loyal team at the Capitol has become my chosen tribe. We share late-night takeout, celebrate our brutal legislative victories, and fiercely protect one another. They are the people who consistently show up. Recently, I was invited back to my university as a guest lecturer to speak with 200 graduate students about navigating public administration. During the Q&A segment, a young woman raised her hand, her voice trembling slightly. "My relatives don't believe this is a real career. How do you deal with the psychological weight of them not taking you seriously?" I offered her a gentle, knowing smile. "You build something so undeniably massive and real that their uninformed opinions become completely irrelevant. You do the grueling work because it sets your soul on fire, not because you are trying to win an argument at the dinner table. The people who truly matter will eventually recognize your worth. The ones who do not were never meant to be part of your empire anyway." The auditorium erupted into a deafening standing ovation. Later that evening, as I walked across the historic campus, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily, my brother's wife. "Harper," she wrote, "I am so incredibly sorry. I should have defended you when they mocked you at the engagement dinner. I should have spoken up during the planning when Thomas suggested banning you. I was a coward, and that makes me complicit in your pain. I hope someday you can forgive us." I typed a calm, measured response. "I appreciate you taking the accountability to say that. I am not open to reconciliation, but I acknowledge the courage it took to send this. I genuinely wish you both well." It was the absolute truth. I held no lingering poison in my heart, but wishing someone a good life does not obligate you to invite them back into yours. Some bridges burned strictly because they were structurally compromised from the very beginning. You don't waste time rebuilding them. You just construct infinitely stronger ones on completely different shores. If you have ever had to walk away from a poisonous household to save your own sanity, tell me your story down in the comments. What choices would you have made in my shoes? Does any of this deeply resonate with your own journey? And if you have ever been entirely underestimated by the exact individuals who should have believed in you the most, hit that like button right now, because you are certainly not alone in this fight. The massive public project I am leading will stand as my permanent mark on the world. The state executive's unwavering belief in my potential completely altered my trajectory, and the tight-knit circle I have cultivated through my career by consciously choosing individuals who consistently show up and offer genuine respect, that is the ultimate triumph. My brother sent a text claiming my presence would completely ruin the aesthetic of his big day. He was dreadfully mistaken. My absence from his elite ceremony did not ruin a single thing. It merely served as a mirror, reflecting exactly what truly matters in this world. Showing up for the people who actually value your existence, constructing something undeniably monumental, and absolutely never saying sorry for the heights you reached with your own two hands. You are not alone. You never were. Subscribe to Karma's Coils for more stories where the quiet ones win.